So you've gone through the process of positioning layers in 3D space, you've added some lights, you've adjusted the material options, and now to create your final animation, all we have to do is add a camera into the scene. So to start, let's look at our timeline. And sure enough, we have 3 different lights that are in the scene, and we have several layers with 3D enabled. So to add a camera, let's go up to the layer menu and choose New Camera. There are 2 different kinds of cameras we can choose from. Click on the camera type, and let's select the one node camera first. Go to the preset dropdown, click on that, and you'll notice we have a bunch of different focal lengths, and these are designed to function like DSLR lenses. So I'll choose the 50mm lens, and come down to the bottom and click OK. The camera's been added into the scene, and just to keep things organized, I'll place it above all of my lights. Press P to open the position data of that camera, and then in order to see the scene more clearly, I want to change the view in the composition panel. So go to the lower right area of the composition panel and click on the dropdown where it says One View. Switch it to 2 views horizontal. And then click on the left side here to make this view active. Press the comma key to zoom out. I pressed it twice. Then press and hold the space bar down to get your hand tool, and click and drag up so we can actually see the camera in the scene. Now with the one node camera, if I scrub on the x-axis, it's going to move perfectly parallel to what it's looking at in the scene. But I don't necessarily want that, so I'm going to go ahead and disable the visibility for camera 1. Go back up under the layer menu and choose New Camera. This time under the type, change it to a 2-node camera and click OK. Press P to open the position, and with the 2-node camera, scrub on the x-axis. And you notice this camera will continually point to the middle of the scene. Now, hold down Shift on your keyboard and click and drag on the X until we get way far over to the side. Something like this. Click on the stopwatch to add your first keyframe. Move 3 seconds down the timeline, and let's hover over the X parameter, and click and drag, and then hold Shift after you start to drag, and that will give us a nice motion to the camera. Notice once we've actually set 2 positions with the camera, the motion path has handles. So here, I'll click on this handle, and I'll just drag it out a little bit, and I can do the same thing on this left handle, and now we can give a little arc to our camera as it rotates around. In order to view this, let's click on the right side of our viewport here to make the active camera side active, and then change our views from 2 views to 1 view, and then press the spacebar. It may take a second to load up in RAM and cache everything so you can actually see it. Through the magic of editing, I will just show you what this looks like in a second. Now that probably took a little while to render, but there were a lot of lights in the scene with a lot of different settings, and that's something you should just be aware of when you're animating objects in 3D space. But when it comes to flying cameras through a 3D scene, you have 2 choices, a 1-node camera or a 2-node camera. It's the 2-node camera that has a point of interest, so if you'd like to orbit around something like we just did in our scene, make sure you use the 2-node camera. While positioning layers in 3D space can be fun and exciting, it's a lot more interesting when you actually start creating true 3D geometry. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial, and what makes that possible is the Cinema 4D renderer. Go to the timeline and select layer 1, and if you look on the right side in the switches panel, you'll notice 3D has been enabled. Go ahead and press P to open position, and notice it's moved 90 pixels closer to us on the Z-axis. Now, if you collapse layer 1 and open up its options, we have transform options. And if we collapse the transform options, we have material options, but we don't have any geometry options. So let's click on the words Change Renderer. That'll open the composition settings to the 3D Renderer tab. If you click on the dropdown, you could choose Cinema 4D. Go ahead and do that, and then click OK to set Cinema 4D as the renderer. Now we have full access to our geometry options. Go ahead and open the geometry options, and since this was an Illustrator layer, I have an option for curvature. Click on that percentage parameter and drag it to the right, and let go, and you notice it's created a curve to the layer. If you increase the number of segments, it will smooth out that curve. In order to more clearly see this, select layer 1 and press R to open the rotation orientation settings, and scrub on the Y rotation parameter, and here you can see the layer is bent in a curve. Go ahead and press Ctrl Z a few times until you get back to the original flat layer. Let's convert this so we can extrude true 3D data. With layer 1 selected, go up to the layer menu and choose Shapes from Vector Layer. That will give me a shape layer. And while we're at it, let's do the same for layer 3. Select layer 3, and instead of going up to the layer menu, just right-click or control-click on the layer and choose the same option. Create shapes from vector layer. Move the newly created shape layer up underneath layer 1 so they're both together. With layer 2 selected, hold down Shift and click on layer 1 so both layers are selected, and press AA very quickly to open the geometry options and the material settings. And I'll scroll up in my timeline so I can get to my geometry options. Since both layers are selected, when I make this change, they'll both change. So set an extrusion depth of 40 and press Enter on your keyboard. That has created depth to our object, but we can't really see it yet. So press R to open the rotation orientation settings and click and drag on the Y rotation. I'll drag it to around plus 29. That's giving me a good view of my 3D object, but I really can't see it until I add a light into the scene. So go up under the layer menu and choose New, Light. For the light, I'll just move the light settings out of the way here. Click on the light type drop-down, and let's choose a point light. Set the intensity to 100. We can leave the fall off and cast shadow settings selected, and then click OK. Now with the light in the scene, you can see I actually have true 3D geometry. Press P to open up the light settings, and scrub on the Z-axis to move the light either further away or closer to the geometry. Now whenever you're working in the Cinema 4D renderer, there's one thing to really pay attention to, and that's the final render settings. So go to the upper right corner of the composition panel and click on the wrench icon. Here, under the renderer options, mine was set just to the right of typical. Yours could be set down at draft. I typically work at draft settings as I'm creating animation, and then just before I go to render out my composition, I change this up to just above the middle section here till I see the anti-aliasing switch to best, and I click OK. So there are a lot more settings you could go through within the material options of a Cinema 4D layer, but you understand the basics of creating 3D geometry in Cinema 4D. Illustrator layers can be converted to shape layers, and shape layers can have true depth, and any text layers can also have true 3D created out of there as well.